Cinemassacre's Monster Madness. Top 10 Tuesday.
I've been doing Monster Madness marathons for 10 years now, and in those 10 years I've reviewed a ton of horror movies. But my original intention was to recommend only the best. This is in case you're just getting into horror movies, or you're looking for some good ones that you might not have seen. But as the years went on, I started picking crappy movies too, to mix it up, and just to keep you entertained one way or another. It became more about just making your Halloween season a little more Halloween-y. Now that there's so many Monster Madness movies behind me, I'm a bit concerned that a newcomer could be overwhelmed by all the movies that I've spotlighted. That's why I'm dedicating these Tuesdays to top 10 lists, to narrow it down and leave you with the best of the best. Obviously, it's just an opinion. No matter how I rank these movies, no matter which order they fall in, it doesn't change that these are all movies I recommend. All these movies are great, but it comes down to which ones I recommend the most in order of priority. So let's go. It's Top 10 Tuesday. I've broken these lists into different horror periods. The way I see it, there's the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and the Bronze Age. I should note that the Silent Age predates the Golden Age, and since we're short on time, I'll just go on record of saying Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu, and Phantom of the Opera are the main essentials. If you're interested in silent antique horror, see those. Let's start with the Golden Age, which began in the 30s with the talkies, when movies with sound was a new invention. This is also when horror became a genre. Near the end of the 30s, the genre started to die down a bit, but came right back with all new commercial appeal. This leads into the 40s, and since the Golden Age roughly spans 2 decades and has 2 distinct movements, I feel it's best to split it up between the 30s and the 40s, so you get 2 top 10s today. Not a top 20 exactly, just 2 separate columns, 2 different top 10s, okay? So first up, the 30s. Oh boy, even this is tough. Here's some honorable mentions. The Black Cat, Dr. X, White Zombie, Murders in the Rue Morgue, M, Mad Love, Mystery of the Wax Museum, Island of Lost Souls, and Hound of the Baskervilles, which is a Sherlock Holmes movie. More like a mystery, but it has a horror atmosphere. Freaks. Many would say Freaks should make the list, but it's hard for me to place it above others when it's not really a full horror movie. It just happens to have a horror scene in it, the ending. But either way, I recommend it. Great movie. Okay, on to the list. Number 10. The Old Dark House. Atmosphere is the key word here. It's just a bunch of travelers stuck in a house during a thunderstorm with a very odd family. No music, just a steady soundtrack of wind and thunder. It's as classic as they come. Number 9. The Raven. Bela Lugosi plays a surgeon who's obsessed with the stories of Edgar Allan Poe. When his great love is denied of him, he becomes a mad lunatic, subjecting his victims to his house full of traps. He disfigures the face of a criminal played by Boris Karloff and forces him to carry out his evil plans. This is one of the rare instances where Lugosi gets to upstage Karloff, and I honestly think it's one of Lugosi's most sinister roles. Number 8. The Mummy. Ancient mummy Imhotep rises to search for the mummy of his beloved mummy princess, and then her reincarnation. Great on atmosphere, has a dreamlike quality. Karloff's voice has a hypnotic effect. Love the flashback scenes of ancient Egypt. But what makes it the most special is the original story that doesn't rely on any literary source. It has sort of a fairy tale quality, a love story that spanned thousands of years. Number 7. The Invisible Man. Based on the H.G. Wells story about a scientist who makes himself invisible but can't find the way back and grows increasingly mad and power-hungry. The special effects are impressive for 1933, and Claude Rains is absolutely fantastic as the Invisible Man. Number 6. A Tie. Dracula. both the English and Spanish versions. These two films were made simultaneously, one the famous Bela Lugosi version with an English-speaking cast, and the other with a Spanish-speaking cast. The Spanish version is better in many ways, but the one that put Dracula into pop culture is the Lugosi version. Anytime somebody imitates Dracula, they're imitating Lugosi. The lack of music enhances the creepy mood. It may seem too slow for a modern audience, but if you're in the right mindset and you're looking for that good old-fashioned chilling atmosphere, then this is mandatory. This is the gold standard. Number 5. Frankenstein with Boris Karloff. Everybody knows the story of a scientist who creates a monster, but this is where all the famous tropes come from, like It's Alive, the angry mob of villagers, the burning windmill, the grave robbing, and all the loud machinery buzzing in that laboratory. Mary Shelley came up with the story and all the philosophical ideas behind it, but the movie is what made it as famous as it is. The classic image of the monster that we all know is Jack Pierce's makeup design for Boris Karloff. Number 4. Bride of Frankenstein. Very rare in horror films when the sequel surpasses it. For any of its Mary Shelley source material that it missed the first time around, this time it makes up for it with the monster's visit to an old blind man and the creation of the monster's mate. Karloff gets to speak this time, really getting the chance to shine, leading to more famous cliches like fire, bad, and all that. You sympathize more with the monster this time. It also introduces another mad scientist, Dr. Pretorius, played by Ernest Thesiger, who is so sinister and great, he actually upstages Colin Clive's Frankenstein. Lots of dark comedy, even religious symbolism. With this movie, there's always a lot to notice, to go back and rewatch. Number 3. Son of Frankenstein. I don't know how it happened, but the third installment in the series, which is a semi-reboot, somehow surpasses them all. I didn't think so the first time I saw it because the monster is no longer the central focus. It's more about the three-way battle of wits between Frankenstein's son, played by Basil Rathbone, the Inspector Crow, played by Lionel Atwill, and the vengeful, broken-necked Igor, played by Bela Lugosi, one of his all-time greatest performances. The dialogue is well-written, and the gothic sets and cinematography make for the perfect classic horror experience. Number 2. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Frederick March, in his dual role as Jekyll and Hyde, is so good he won an Academy Award, something that hardly ever happens with horror movies. Especially when he's Mr. Hyde, he is outstanding. He's such a horrible, despicable character. I'd say one of the best screen villains of all time. Everything else on the technical side, from the camera work to the makeup to the foggy sets, is all top-notch. And the number 1 1930s horror film? King Kong, the classic story of Beauty and Beast. Yes, it's mostly a fantasy adventure film, but it has dinosaurs chowing down on people, gruesome close-ups of Kong putting people in his mouth and stomping them into the ground, and probably has more screaming than your typical slasher film, not just from the iconic Fay Wray, but the entire team of adventurers. This isn't just one of the best monster movies of all time. It's a contender for best film of all time. For 1933, what it accomplished was unbelievable. When sound films were relatively new, this has an entire musical score composed to match all the action, and with all the different types of dinosaur growls, it's a fully fleshed out sound design. And on the visual side, Willis O'Brien and his team had to work with a combination of all these new techniques. Stop motion, a giant puppet head of Kong, not to mention a giant hand and foot, composite shots, rear screen projection, front screen projection. They had to figure this all out. They pioneered the whole special effects industry. This film proved that cinema is a medium made for fantasy and imagination to show us things that could never exist in real life. It inspired Ray Harryhausen, Peter Jackson, Steven Spielberg, everybody. We owe everything to King Kong. Now, The top 10 of the 40s. The 40s horror movies were a more commercial venture, especially with Universal as the big monster movie machine. During World War II, the classic monsters weren't as scary, and by the end of the decade, they were played for laughs in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I can't call that one a horror film since there isn't any legitimate horror in it. Even when Costello is scared, it's played up for comedy, so I'm giving that an honorable mention. Number 10, Return of the Vampire. It's Lugosi as a vampire that's not Dracula, but almost is, and a werewolf thrown in for good measure. What more could you want? I love this film visually above all else. The cemetery and all the fog puts you in the perfect Halloween mood. It probably has more fog in it than John Carpenter's The Fog. If you want fog, this is the movie. Number 9. The Mummy's Hand. This is the first appearance of the mummy Karras, the more cliché version that's wrapped in bandages and goes around strangling people. His first outing is probably the best. There's a lot of comedy in this movie, but it never gets in the way too much. It also has a lot of action-adventure elements with a tinge of espionage and treasure hunting. I believe it may have been one of the many influences for Indiana Jones. Number 8. House of Frankenstein. Boris Karloff gives his final bow in the Frankenstein series, not as the monster, but this time as a mad scientist who wants to play a game of brain swapping. There's a love triangle between the Wolfman, a hunchback, and a gypsy girl. Dracula appears as a warm-up act in the beginning. The plot is kind of a mess, but that's what makes it really fun. Number 7. Cat People, from producer Val Lewton. Yes, it's about a woman who turns into a cat, but the supernatural elements are downplayed. It's not one of the most action-packed, exciting films of this decade. Not much really happens on screen, but what this movie did for the horror genre can't be ignored. It's all about the suspense. I also really like the follow-up, Curse of the Cat People, but that's not a horror film at all. It's a real touching story, but just happens to have a real misleading title. Number 6. The Body Snatcher, also Val Lewton and based on a Robert Louis Stevenson story. This is Karloff and Lugosi's final film together, though Lugosi is wasted in a minor role. Karloff plays a body snatcher who robs graves to sell the bodies to doctors. It has some parts that drag, but every scene with Karloff is so great. He always has that sinister, shit-eating grin. Number 5. The Beast with Five Fingers. The best of the Killer Hand movies. The first act is slow, but give it time and it gets good. I think it's Peter Lorre's finest performance in a horror film. What makes it great is that you never know if he's really seeing the hand or he's going insane. Number 4. The Invisible Man Returns. Yeah, after including the first Invisible Man, can't forget about the sequel. Vincent Price plays a man who's wrongly accused of murder who becomes invisible to track down the real killer. Vincent Price is outstanding, especially when he starts going mad like his predecessor, and the special effects won an Academy Award. It's almost as good as the original. Number 3. Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. This is the movie that got me into classic horror. It's a sequel to The Wolfman, but a reboot to the Frankenstein timeline. Here, the Wolfman is seeking a cure for his werewolf disease and seeks out Dr. Frankenstein, but instead meets his daughter and the monster. It opens with an excellent cemetery set and ends with an awesome showdown between the two monsters. This is what invented the versus movies and cinematic universes. Lots of fun. Number 2. Jekyll and Hyde. I didn't plan it this way, but once again, we have a Jekyll and Hyde movie coming in at number 2. It's almost the same as the 30s movie. I've always felt conflicted about it. Like, what's the point of remaking it so soon and so similar? Well, because of Spencer Tracy. Holy crap, he's amazing. And all around, it's a technically well-made movie. A real big-budget feel with class and elegance. Number 1. The Wolfman. Nothing represents 1940s horror to me more than The Wolfman. This is the one that all the rest branched out from and that made a star out of Lon Chaney Jr. He's very charismatic. You really care for his character and feel bad for him when he becomes the wolf. I like the pace. I like how it builds up to his first werewolf transformation, even though it lacks a good close-up transformation, and believe it or not, there's no shot of the full moon. Still, this is the all-time werewolf masterpiece, never surpassed. Whew, well, there you go. Next Tuesday, we get into the Silver Age, the first half of the Silver Age. And if you want to know more about any of these films, most of them I reviewed in the past, sometimes even outside of Monster Madness. So if you want more details on any of these films, search for my full reviews on Cinemassacre.com.